Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. Around 50,000 years ago, in what's now modern-day Iraq, there lived a Neanderthal we call Nandi. And this guy, this single individual, might just be the most beaten-up, battle-scarred person ever discovered in archaeology. Seriously. When I say he walked, I mean he barely walked. He limped, stumbled, probably dragged himself along at times. The list of injuries he survived is absolutely astonishing once you stop to think about it. At some point in his life, something horrific happened, an accident or maybe even violence, that left the entire right side of his body shattered. His arm was so badly damaged, it was essentially destroyed. Somehow, it healed, but it shrank and twisted, left small and withered. We'll never know what really caused it. Maybe he chased a mountain goat too far up a cliff and fell. Maybe someone pushed him, or he was attacked by another group. Whatever it was, it changed his body forever. And if you're using these stories to fall asleep, that's exactly why I make them. So hit subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. I love seeing comments from Berlin at breakfast and Boston at bedtime all at once. But back to Nandi. Here's the wild part. He didn't just destroy his arm. He lost his entire right forearm. The remaining bone ends at a sharp angled point, leading scientists to wonder, was this the world's first successful amputation? Think about that. Someone had to stop the bleeding. Someone had to feed him, clean his wounds, and care for him, not for days, but for years. Because the bone shows it fully healed, meaning he lived long after it happened. How did they do it? How did he avoid bleeding to death? How did his companions manage to keep him alive in such brutal conditions? It's mind-blowing. And that wasn't the end of it. He also suffered a massive blow to the left side of his face that crushed part of his skull and eye socket, likely blinding him in one eye. His leg and foot both had healed fractures too, forcing him to walk with a heavy limp. And as if that wasn't enough, he had bony growths in both ears that probably left him partially deaf. Maybe the hearing loss came from another head injury. Maybe it was a genetic condition. We'll never know for sure. What is certain is that there's no chance he could have survived any of this alone. Someone, or several someones, cared for him deeply. They shared food, helped him heal, and gave him the time to recover. And remember, these weren't people living in comfort. These were Ice Age hunter-gatherers, constantly on the move, facing predators and cold and hunger. Every person in the group had to contribute just to stay alive. And yet, they still looked after Nandi. Not just once, but again and again, through years of injury and recovery. You can't help but wonder, did Neanderthals use local plants or mushrooms to numb pain? Because living with those kinds of wounds without medicine sounds unbearable. Interestingly, one Neanderthal found in Spain had traces of poplar bark in their teeth, and poplar naturally contains salicylic acid, the same chemical in modern aspirin. So maybe, just maybe, they used nature's own painkillers. What's fascinating is that the same skeleton that shows so much suffering also reveals their compassion. The violence and pain are undeniable, but so is the care, the empathy, the love. Despite everything, Nandi lived to around 40, a long life for his time. The rest of his bones were strong and muscular, showing he adapted and stayed active. Maybe he focused on crafting tools instead of hunting, using his skill and experience to help in other ways. But before we go further into his story, who were the Neanderthals really? Like all great apes, humans or otherwise, their childhood was full of learning, curiosity, and vulnerability. It must have been the same for them, but much of their childhood world has vanished into the fog of time. What we do know is that growing up as a Neanderthal wasn't easy. They lived through freezing climates, hunted wild animals, and constantly searched for food and shelter. Stress marks on the teeth of a Neanderthal child from France show they endured real hardship. Illness, hunger, brutal winters. That child was lucky to survive. Others weren't so fortunate. In one French cave, archaeologists found the remains of 2 adults, 2 teenagers, and 2 children, all Neanderthals, all around 100,000 years old. Their bones were shattered, cut, and broken apart. Clear signs of cannibalism. Every bone told the same grim story. All of it seems to have happened during one terrible event. Was cannibalism common among them? Probably not. But maybe, in desperate times, when food vanished and the last horse left the valley, they had no other choice. But life wasn't always that dark. Around 80,000 years ago, in what's now Normandy, France, a Neanderthal family left behind a different kind of trace, footprints in the sand dunes. Among the bones and tools, archaeologists found 257 prints, most of them belonging to children. The smallest were made by a toddler, maybe 2 years old. It's impossible not to imagine the scene. Kids running around, collecting shells, leaving tiny handprints as they played, their parents close behind. Maybe an older sibling shouted for them to keep up, or a cautious mother held her child's hand as they wobbled on the shifting sand. And maybe, just maybe, a curious wolf trailed them from a distance. To have such tender traces preserved for 80,000 years, a footprint, a handprint, is something extraordinary. At some point, young Nandi too had to learn to survive in that harsh, Paleolithic world, to shape stones into tools, to butcher animals, to cook meat for his family. These were essential life skills passed down through patient teaching. And across Europe, we find other hints of Neanderthal life. In a cave in Spain, archaeologists found over 200 bird bones, mostly doves and choughs, burned and cut, showing they were hunted, cooked, and eaten. Each fragment tells us a little more about who they were, not the brutish cavemen of old cartoons, but intelligent, social, caring beings who suffered and loved and survived together. Not only does this prove that Neanderthals were skilled hunters of small game, but the fine cut marks on those bird bones might have been made by tiny Neanderthal hands. Maybe their parents tossed them a bird to practice on while they prepared the rest of the meal. Recent discoveries have completely changed how we see Neanderthals. They appeared as a distinct branch of humanity about 350,000 years ago, and from that point until they disappeared around 40,000 years ago, they endured 6 global climate cycles. 6. Far from being frozen cave specialists trapped in icy wastelands, they actually preferred environments that weren't too extreme. Open woodlands, coastal plains, and steppe tundra landscapes stretching from Wales to Palestine, deep into Central Asia and Siberia. These were true survivors, adaptable, tough, and resourceful. Their brains were even larger than ours. The average Neanderthal male had a brain volume of about 1,640 cubic centimeters, females around 1,460, noticeably bigger than modern humans. One specimen, known as Ahmud 1, had a brain capacity of 1,736 cubic centimeters, among the largest ever recorded. But brain size isn't everything. The structure of their brains, especially the parts linked to language and higher cognition, was organized differently. That might explain some of the differences we see in their tools and culture. Still, calling them less intelligent would be a serious mistake. Physically, Neanderthals were built for power. They had wide, strong noses, likely to warm the cold air before it hit their lungs, and their thick chests and muscular frames demanded constant fuel. Living such active lives, they may have needed up to 15% more calories than modern humans. In frigid climates, they might have required as many as 7,000 calories a day. For a family of 10, that's roughly 3 reindeer a week, an enormous task to meet consistently. That kind of energy demand meant they couldn't afford to be picky eaters. Every calorie counted. The richest, fattiest parts of animals, the organs, the brain, the tongue, were prized. But when meat was scarce, they probably turned to smaller snacks, Grubs, insects, anything that moved under a log could make a quick meal for a hungry Neanderthal like Nandi. And we now know their diet wasn't just meat. A Neanderthal from Shanidar Cave, known as Shanidar III, had traces of plant material preserved in his dental plaque. Instead of eating only goats and wild donkeys, his teeth revealed he'd consumed fruits like date palms, wild seeds, and grasses such as vetch. Collecting those tiny seeds would have taken patience and time, a serious investment of effort by his community. And when you think about it, the Neanderthals' massive calorie needs must have shaped every part of their society. How did mothers gather enough food to feed themselves while nursing infants? How did families judge when a landscape could support them, or when it was time to move on? And maybe, just maybe, that relentless hunger played a role in their downfall. When leaner, more efficient humans spread out of Africa, perhaps their bodies gave them the edge when food ran low. Questions like these still puzzle scientists today. What we do know is that Neanderthals were astonishingly adaptable. They ate everything, turtles, mussels, even hibernating bears, and they developed specialized tools to get it all. We have plenty of their stone tools, but sometimes, under perfect preservation conditions, we get rare glimpses of their deeper ingenuity. In Italy, Neanderthals used beeswax mixed with conifer resin to glue their spear points to wooden shafts, heating the mix over a fire before applying it. That's prehistoric chemistry in action, and you can bet they helped themselves to a little honey while they worked. One of the biggest mysteries is wood. Since it decays so easily, almost all wooden Neanderthal tools are lost to time, but every now and then we find traces. At the Abric Romani rock shelter in northern Spain, a wooden tool left a trowel-shaped imprint in the ground, maybe part of a primitive kitchen utensil or digging tool. And at Poggetti Vecchi in Italy, archaeologists uncovered the remains of 58 wooden digging sticks, likely used for gathering plants and roots. And then there are the Schöningen spears, beautifully crafted wooden weapons dating back 380,000 years, probably made by early Neanderthals. They were found among the butchered remains of horses, animals they almost certainly ambushed and killed. Even more recently, another wooden artifact, likely a throwing stick, was discovered, around 300,000 years old. Tools like these gave Neanderthals the edge in hunting small, fast animals like birds. Now, let's talk about hunting, because this is where things get seriously fascinating. For a long time, scientists thought Neanderthals were scavengers, just picking at leftovers. But new evidence paints a different picture. They were apex predators. Recent forensic work on ancient hunting sites shows they were skilled strategists and selective butchers, traits once thought unique to modern humans. They didn't just chase animals aimlessly, they planned their hunts. They mapped the land, anticipated animal behavior, and struck with precision. Professor Mark White from Durham University found that Neanderthals returned to the same kill sites again and again. The animal remains suggest that they often targeted herd animals, killing many at once, then butchering only the fattest. That's efficiency. That's planning. They were masters of terrain. They understood where prey would be most vulnerable: cul-de-sacs, steep ravines, narrow passes, blind corners, and they used these natural traps to their advantage. Since many prey species were faster and stronger, Neanderthals relied on ambush tactics. Surprise neutralized the animal's speed and power. In Zvolen, Poland, horse bones show they drove entire herds down grassy floodplains into bottlenecks between cliffs and rivers. In Salzgitter Lebenstedt, Germany, reindeer were intercepted as they migrated to their rutting grounds. Every animal was skinned for fur, but only the choicest, fattest cuts of meat were taken. The rest was left behind, not wasteful, just selective. They had more meat than they could carry, and this was dangerous, up-close hunting. Evidence from two 120,000-year-old deer shows clear impact marks from wooden spears. Ballistic tests confirmed these blows came from low-velocity thrusts, meaning Neanderthals crept in close and struck from an underhand angle. Picture the scene. You're a Neanderthal hunter, crouched in the shadows of a ravine. Your group is split, some waiting uphill with spears, others making noise to drive the deer toward you. The animal rushes past, 20 meters, 10, 5, and you explode from cover, plunging your spear with both hands deep into its side. The stone tip, glued with birch tar just days ago, pierces flesh and bone. The deer stumbles. Your companions close in. It's over in moments. That's how they hunted. And it wasn't just deer. In 2024, researchers found proof that a Neanderthal brought down a cave lion, a massive 300-kilogram predator, around 48,000 years ago in central Germany. Armed with nothing but a wooden spear, a Neanderthal hunter killed one of the most dangerous animals of the Ice Age with a single strike to the ribs. It's the oldest direct evidence of Neanderthals hunting large predators, big cats that once ruled Ice Age Europe before vanishing about 13,000 years ago. The wound angle shows the lion was lying on its side when the fatal blow was delivered. Maybe it was weakened, starving, surrounded by hunters with javelins. Then came the final thrust. And here's what's even more fascinating. The lion's claws were still attached to its pelt, suggesting it wasn't skinned just for meat. The hide had symbolic value, a trophy maybe, or a sign of status. Moments like this show us something profound. Neanderthals didn't just survive. They thought, they planned, they created meaning. Their hunts weren't only about survival, they were about identity. It wasn't just about getting meat, it was about meaning. Neanderthals clearly valued the trophies of the animals they hunted. They deliberately left the claws attached to the pelts, not for convenience but for aesthetic reasons. Cutting the skin off at the wrist would have been much easier, but they chose not to. That decision tells us something about pride, about beauty, about symbolism. Their hunting groups likely used complex, cooperative strategies, especially when taking down large prey. Analysis of fire remains, and sleeping areas at one archaeological site suggests that a typical Neanderthal group might have included 8 to 12 individuals. Moving the complete carcasses of medium or large animals would have required groups that size, strong, coordinated, and organized. At Abric Romani, in Spain, archaeologists found evidence that Neanderthals occasionally carried entire animal carcasses back to camp, no matter how big they were. This shows that their hunting parties were large and efficient enough to haul full-grown animals, sometimes weighing tons. Around 125,000 years ago in Germany, Neanderthals hunted straight-tusked elephants that could weigh more than 11 tons. Just imagine that. Massive creatures, dangerous and powerful, capable of crushing a human with a single swing of their trunk. And yet, Neanderthals developed tactics to bring them down. That's not luck. That's teamwork, planning, and courage. Neanderthals were also masters of the sea. On the coasts of the Iberian, Italian, and Peloponnesian peninsulas, they gathered and hunted marine life as far back as 150,000 years ago. At sites like Cueva Bajondillo in Spain, they waded or dove for shellfish, much like modern humans later did. At Gibraltar's Vanguard Cave, they ate monk seals, dolphins, tuna, sea bream, and sea urchins. At Gruta da Figueira Brava in Portugal, there's evidence of large-scale shellfish harvesting, crabs and fish collected in bulk. In Italy's Grotta di Castelcivita, they fished freshwater streams for trout, chub, and eels. In France's Abri du Marat, they caught perch and chub, while in Russia's Kadaro Cave, they even went after Black Sea salmon. But they weren't just hunters and fishers. Neanderthals also consumed a wide range of plants and mushrooms across their territories. Most of what we know about them comes from caves, nature's time capsules that preserve their traces for hundreds of thousands of years. But Neanderthals didn't live only in caves. They traveled, hunted, and built in the open world, though finding evidence of that is rare. At the site of La Ferracie in France, archaeologists found what looks like a Neanderthal camp, a ring of post holes surrounding areas where toolmaking, cooking, and butchering took place. Each activity had its own space. That means they understood layout, function, and order. They had a developed sense of home. We see this in other places too. At Kabara Cave in Israel, the remains of daily life were organized into trash heaps. In El Salt, Spain, there's even evidence that Neanderthals burned their feces. They didn't want waste around their living spaces. Surprisingly tidy, even house-proud. At Abric Romani, again, some archaeologists think they may have built lean-tos or temporary wooden structures inside caves to create more comfortable shelter. If more wooden artifacts had survived over time, we'd probably be astonished at how resourceful and inventive they were in adapting to their surroundings. All of this points to one thing: Neanderthals had a deep ability to give meaning to their environment. They cared about space. They cared about home. You can almost imagine one returning from a long hunt, stepping into the glow of firelight, feeling relief and belonging in that familiar cave. But their creativity went far beyond survival. Neanderthals expressed themselves artistically, not through random scratches, but through complex symbolic behaviors that appeared 20,000 years before Homo sapiens arrived in Europe. Around 170,000 years ago, at Bruniquel Cave in France, Neanderthals ventured 336 meters into total darkness, deep inside a cold, wet cave. Think about that journey. They carried torches made from animal fat, crawled through narrow tunnels, and kept their lights burning. And deep inside, they built circular structures from stalagmites and lit small fires inside them. Why? Why go so far? Why build anything there? If the dating and interpretations are correct, this discovery challenges everything we thought we knew about their minds. It shows imagination. It shows purpose. The evidence for Neanderthal art doesn't end there. From Krapina in Croatia and Grotte d'Uren in France, we find jewelry made from animal talons and teeth. Eagle claws, in particular, seem to have held special meaning. A 2019 study showed Neanderthals hunted golden eagles more often than any other bird of prey, suggesting that these powerful creatures symbolize strength, much like they do in modern cultures today. They weren't just eating these birds, they were selecting and keeping specific parts for symbolic reasons. In 2 sites in Spain, Neanderthals mixed pigments inside seashells, literally making paint palettes. This was chemistry, preparation, planning. At Cueva de los Aviones, dated to 115,000 years ago, they had ochre-stained and perforated marine shells, red and yellow pigments, and shell containers used for mixing. These weren't random stains. They were carefully made pigment kits. Their use of ochre, a red mineral pigment, dates back at least 250,000 years, from sites like Maastricht Belvedere in the Netherlands. Ochre had many uses: tanning hides, protecting skin from sun and insects, making adhesives, even medicinal purposes, but it also had clear symbolic meaning. At 3 sites in Spain, archaeologists found possible Neanderthal cave paintings, a hand stencil at Maltravieso, red ochre marks at Ardales, and most strikingly, a panel of mysterious symbols at La Pasiega. All these artworks appear to predate modern humans in Europe by about 20,000 years, meaning Neanderthals made them. The paintings at Ardales are especially fascinating. Microscopic analysis showed the red pigment wasn't natural to the cave. It was brought there and deliberately applied. Even more incredible, the pigment was added repeatedly over a span of 10,000 years, meaning generations of Neanderthals revisited the same spot to continue their art. These pigments are estimated to be at least 64,800 years old, making them possibly the oldest known cave paintings on Earth. At La Pasiega, later arriving Homo sapiens may have even added their own drawings to the same walls. 2 species of humans, separated by hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, leaving their marks together on the same canvas. It makes you wonder, What did those paintings mean? What inspired the deep fires of Bruniquel? Why travel so far into darkness to create something so beautiful? One theory suggests they first entered those caves to hunt hibernating bears, something Neanderthals were known to do, and that once inside, their imagination took over. Whatever the reason, what remains clear is this: Neanderthals weren't primitive brutes. They were intelligent, creative, organized, and emotional beings, capable of cooperation, art, and meaning. We may never know exactly what went on in those ancient minds, but it's clear there was something remarkable behind those large Neanderthal eyes, a spark of creativity, intelligence, and awareness. The old stereotype of brutish, dim-witted Neanderthals scraping out a meager existence belongs firmly in the past. For decades, scientists doubted whether they were capable of symbolic expression or art at all. But discoveries over the last few years, pigments, crafted ornaments, and traces of what may be body paint, have changed that picture completely. A few stubborn voices still cling to the outdated image of Neanderthals as primitive savages, but they're now a small and shrinking minority. Most modern researchers fully accept that Neanderthals were artists, thinkers, and innovators in their own right. And perhaps even more astonishing than their art is their technology. At Abri du Marat in France, scientists found a tiny fragment of a 3-ply cord made from fibers of tree bark, wrapped carefully around a stone tool. It's the oldest direct evidence of fiber technology ever discovered. To make it, they needed to understand trees, their inner bark, and how to transform raw plant material into strong, functional cordage. String making might sound simple, but it demands complex thought. You have to realize that a single fiber is weak, but twisting several together in opposite directions creates strength and balance. You have to keep track of multiple layers of twisting, first ply, second ply, third, each one held in tension while the others are added. It's a process that requires memory, sequencing, and precision, a clear sign of advanced cognitive ability. Fiber technology would have been part of daily life, used for nets, traps, carrying tools, or making clothing. It likely influenced how they moved through the seasons, when they traveled, and what materials they gathered. When you put all of this together, their art, their tool-making, their organization, it's hard not to see Neanderthals as the mental equals of early modern humans. Neanderthals generally lived in small groups, maybe 20 people at most. Sometimes they split up, sometimes they joined with others. But DNA evidence shows that they weren't isolated or inbred within single clans. Artifacts tell us that they moved materials, stone, tools, pigments, over distances of hundreds of kilometers. That means contact between groups, meeting, trading, perhaps even storytelling. While they may not have built vast trade networks like later Homo sapiens, there's still evidence of long-distance exchange. Some Neanderthal objects found far from home, 20, 30, even 300 kilometers away, prove that communication between groups did exist, even if rarely. A Neanderthal child's teeth analyzed in 2018 revealed something strikingly human. It was born in the spring and weaned at around 2.5 years old, almost exactly like modern hunter-gatherer children. After weaning, children likely began helping with daily tasks, and by adolescence, they were expected to join hunts for large, dangerous animals. It was a tough, risky life, but new studies have revealed that it wasn't necessarily harsher than it was for our own ancestors. Neanderthals and early modern humans of the Upper Paleolithic show nearly identical rates of cranial trauma, with men in both groups being injured more often than women, just as we see in later human populations. In short, life was dangerous for everyone, not just for Neanderthals. The idea that they lived unusually violent or short lives seems oversimplified. What the evidence really shows is that it was simply a perilous time to be alive. However, one detail stands out. Among Neanderthals, younger individuals, under 30, appear more frequently among the injured. That pattern doesn't appear among early Homo sapiens. It suggests young Neanderthals may have been injured less often or survived their wounds more successfully. Some researchers think this might reflect differences in social care, healing practices, or how communities treated the injured. Many of their wounds healed. Take Shanidar 1, Nandi. He lived to an advanced age despite severe injuries, a crippled arm, limited mobility, and impaired senses. Yet he survived for years, which would have been impossible without help. Someone fed him, protected him, and cared for him every single day. And Shanidar 1 wasn't unique. Shanidar 3 also suffered serious wounds and lived long after them. Many Neanderthal skeletons show clear signs of healing after major trauma. These patterns of survival reveal something extraordinary: compassion. For years, scientists underestimated that part of the story. They saw the physical evidence of care but assumed it was accidental or emotionless, that Neanderthals helped only because it benefited the group. But more recent research paints a different picture. The survival of so many injured individuals shows consistent, deliberate caregiving, evidence of empathy, community, and social bonds. Imagine Nandi and his kin moving through the hills, hunting goats, gathering seeds and roots. They must have met others along the way, some Neanderthals, some not quite like them. Around 40,000 to 55,000 years ago, Nandi lived at a time when a new kind of human, Homo sapiens, was migrating out of Africa and into Eurasia. And here's where the story takes a turn. When our ancestors met Neanderthals, they didn't always fight. Sometimes they fell in love. They had children. You carry the evidence of that union inside you right now. Every person of non-African ancestry has traces of Neanderthal DNA, genes that still influence your skin, immune system, and even how your body reacts to certain environments. Those genetic exchanges must have happened soon after Homo sapiens left Africa, probably somewhere in Western Asia. And while modern African populations have less Neanderthal ancestry, about 0.3 to 0.5%, that small amount comes from later migrations of humans who left Africa, mixed with Neanderthals, and eventually returned home. That means Nandi lived at the very crossroads of human history, the time and place where our two lineages last intertwined. The Neanderthal DNA in your body might trace back to him, or to others like him who lived in the caves of Shanidar. Neanderthals aren't distant cousins. In a small but very real sense, they are our ancestors. It's easy to imagine their first encounters as rare, isolated events, but new research shows the connection ran much deeper. Interactions between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens happened many times across thousands of years, and just as we carry Neanderthal genes today, Neanderthals carried some of ours. Roughly 6% of the Neanderthal genome came from early modern humans who had left Africa and reached Eurasia around 250,000 years ago. So gene flow wasn't one way, it went both directions. That means Neanderthals and Homo sapiens weren't two separate species, but two expressions of the same human continuum, different faces on the same spectrum of humanity. Nandi, truly, was every bit as human as you or I. Genetic studies now let us pinpoint when the two species shared genes. The interbreeding began around 50,000 years ago and lasted for roughly 7,000 years until Neanderthals finally began to fade from the record. 7,000 years. That's not a single encounter, that's generations of contact, of coexistence, of shared life. Most of the Neanderthal DNA found in humans today traces back to one major period of interbreeding, about 47,000 years ago. A long era of connection between our species, not just a brief overlap. The fact that their genes survive within us proves something profound. Neanderthals and Homo sapiens were similar enough not only to produce offspring, but for those children to thrive, grow up, and pass their heritage on to us. It's almost certain that, at least sometimes, encounters between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens were peaceful. We see both violent and cooperative behavior among our closest living relatives, chimpanzees, so it's reasonable to think the same was true for them. Whether interbreeding worked or not depended on the individual pairs involved. So far, we haven't found evidence of Homo sapiens DNA in late Neanderthal genomes from around 40,000 to 60,000 years ago, though that might simply be because of the small number of samples we've recovered. It could also be due to the biology of hybridization itself. Some species can only reproduce successfully in one direction. The absence of Neanderthal mitochondrial DNA in living humans, which is passed down through mothers, suggests that only male Neanderthals and female Homo sapiens could mate successfully. Some studies even suggest that male hybrids may have been less fertile than females. What's truly remarkable is just how much Neanderthal DNA survived. Modern humans still carry fragments of their genome. About 20% of the Neanderthal genome, in total, continues to exist, scattered among us today. Different populations carry different amounts, about 1 to 4% in general, 3 to 8% in modern Eurasians, 2 to 3% in Europeans, and slightly more in East Asians. African populations have little to none, around 0 to 0.5%, though some inherited Neanderthal genes through back migrations of people returning to Africa thousands of years later. But what does this ancient DNA actually do? Recent genetic studies are beginning to answer that. Some Neanderthal genes influence traits in modern humans, especially those linked to the immune system. Variants connected to immunity, skin color, hair type, and metabolism have all been identified. Over half of the Neanderthal genes still active today are related to hair and skin, suggesting these traits gave our ancestors survival advantages in colder, harsher environments. For instance, some Neanderthal gene variants are linked to blonde hair, others to darker tones, and a few to lighter skin pigmentation. Certain inherited alleles even influence body composition, like reduced body fat, taller height in childhood, or a faster resting heart rate. However, not all Neanderthal DNA has been beneficial. Some genes are associated with modern diseases like diabetes, lupus, and Crohn's disease, conditions that may have become harmful only after our lifestyles changed over thousands of years. Still, interbreeding likely gave early humans a vital edge. When Homo sapiens entered new environments, Neanderthal genes helped them adapt quickly. Thicker hair, tougher skin, and stronger immunity against local pathogens. But not every meeting between these groups was peaceful. Take Shanidar III, the Neanderthal whose teeth contained traces of plants. One of his ribs had been pierced by a deep wound, possibly from a weapon. The bone had started to heal, but the tip of the weapon might still have been embedded as it did. Unlike Nandi, who lived years with his injuries, Shanidar III wasn't so fortunate. He likely died within weeks. Who stabbed him, and why? We'll never know. But the evidence suggests conflict, perhaps with a neighboring group of Homo sapiens. After all, human history since then has proven that cooperation isn't always our first instinct. Another skeleton from La Roche-à-Pierrot in France shows a deep healed cut to the skull, evidence of interpersonal violence, the earliest sign of humans using tools as weapons against each other. Some Neanderthal sites even show evidence of cannibalism, bones with cut marks suggesting butchering. But we still don't know if these acts were driven by starvation, ritual, or something else entirely. Modern modeling of disease and genetics reveals something even more complex, an invisible barrier of illness that might have shaped contact between the two species. Each group carried its own set of unique pathogens. When Neanderthals and Homo sapiens first met in the Levant, their separate immune systems may have created a disease border, making deep incursions into each other's territory risky. For thousands of years, both species coexisted in an uneasy balance. Ironically, What might have finally broken that stalemate was the very thing that joined us: interbreeding. The hybrid children of these unions likely carried immune genes from both lineages. Over time, those genes spread across both populations, lifting the burden of disease and allowing modern humans to safely venture deeper into Neanderthal lands. Once that happened, any advantages Homo sapiens had, better tools, stronger social structures, became decisive. Recent studies suggest that disease may have played a much bigger role in Neanderthal extinction than we once thought, perhaps even the main reason modern humans became the last remaining human species on Earth. This theory could also explain why the Neanderthals' end didn't come sooner. We haven't found direct evidence of art in the Shanidar region, but their behavior shows symbolic thought, especially in how they treated their dead, and that's what makes Shanidar Cave so extraordinary. When Nandi was first excavated in the 1950s, the idea that Neanderthals buried their dead was controversial. Many scientists doubted they were capable of such symbolic behavior, but 70 years of research later, it's clear that they did. The Neanderthals at Shanidar practiced mortuary rituals, including simple burials. Ralph Solecki, the archaeologist who first worked there, initially thought he'd found the remains of a single Neanderthal, lying on its side, curled into a fetal position. But as he continued excavating, he uncovered the remains of 3 more, all buried so close together that their bones had become intertwined over time. The odds of 4 Neanderthals dying naturally in the exact same spot are almost impossible. They were almost certainly placed there. To get to the bottom of this mystery, archaeologists returned to Solecki's original trench in 2017. And what they found was extraordinary. Yet another burial that Solecki had missed. This new skeleton was found in a shallow, bowl-shaped depression, its head possibly resting on a stone. That's clear evidence of a deliberate burial. The soil surrounding the bones was unusually dark, rich with decomposed material. Part of that was, of course, the soft tissue of the body itself. But there were also traces of plant matter mixed in, something that makes this discovery even more fascinating. Solecki once believed the Neanderthals at Shanidar had been buried with flowers. At the time, that idea was revolutionary, and for decades it's remained one of the most hotly debated claims in archaeology. Back in the 1950s, routine soil samples were taken from around one of the skeletons, later known as Shanidar 4, for pollen analysis. 8 years later, researchers studying those samples discovered something surprising. 2 of them contained clumps of pollen, whole flower heads, far more than what was found naturally elsewhere in the cave. It suggested that entire flowering plants had been placed over the body. And even more striking, the species identified, yarrow, cornflower, bachelor's button, St. Barnaby's thistle, ragwort, grape hyacinth, horsetail, and hollyhock, all have known medicinal properties. They can act as diuretics, stimulants, astringents, and anti-inflammatories. This led to a bold interpretation. Perhaps this Neanderthal had been a healer, a kind of shaman, a medicine person to their people. Solecki himself wrote that someone in the last ice age must have walked the mountain slopes performing the solemn task of collecting flowers for the dead. To us today, placing flowers with the dead feels natural, a symbol of love and respect. But to find that same tenderness in a Neanderthal burial from 60,000 years ago is astonishing. Still, not everyone agreed. Later research suggested that the pollen might not have come from a ritual at all. Burrows belonging to a small gerbil-like rodent called the Persian jerd were found nearby. These animals are known to hoard seeds and flowers inside their tunnels. Some scientists argued that the pollen in Shanidar 4 could have been introduced naturally, carried in by the rodents or even by solitary bees nesting in the area. Others pointed out that none of the other Neanderthal burials in the cave showed similar signs of ritual treatment. Because of that, many researchers concluded that the flower placement might not have been intentional after all. But even so, nearly everyone agrees that the Shanidar burials themselves, because they occurred repeatedly over many years, were deliberate acts of care. And the debate didn't end there. The newly discovered burial in 2017 reignited it all, especially since this Neanderthal seemed to have been buried with a flaked stone tool in their left hand. Was it a prized possession, a tool for the afterlife, or a symbol of identity and memory? The possibilities are endless and haunting. Excavations revealed that some of these burials were placed in a natural channel on the cave floor, a channel deepened intentionally before burial. There's now strong evidence that the newest skeleton, known as Shanidar Z, was deliberately interred. 4 Neanderthals, including the famous flower burial and this newest find, form what researchers call a unique assemblage. It raises a powerful question. Were Neanderthals returning to the same spot in the cave to lay their dead to rest? A prominent rock found beside Shanidar Z's head might have served as a marker, a kind of prehistoric gravestone revisited by later generations. Whether these burials occurred weeks, decades, or even centuries apart is still unknown. In recent years, evidence has continued to mount that Neanderthals were far more sophisticated than once believed. From abstract cave markings to jewelry made of shells and raptor talons, the clues suggest a species capable of memory, ritual, and meaning. If Shanidar Cave truly served as a place of remembrance, a sacred site where Neanderthals returned again and again to honor their dead, it would point to a cultural depth on par with our own early ancestors. Even so, Solecki's original work is decades old, and modern scientists have set out to re-examine everything. Since 2014, new archaeological teams have been studying the cave, dating its layers, and applying modern techniques unavailable in the 1950s. The bones of the newly discovered skeleton still fit together as they would have in life, its lower body extended into the same sediment block that contained the flower burial and the remains of 2 other adults, both female, along with a fragment of a child. Whether this new individual is directly related to those burials remains to be seen. Analysis is ongoing, and scientists hope to finally test Solecki's theories, not just about flowers, but about the broader rituals surrounding these burials. Today, excavating at Shanidar feels like working atop a sacred site. Thousands of visitors come each year, picnicking, taking wedding photos, or quietly leaving flowers of their own. To dig there is to touch both science and memory at once. As for Nandi, his life likely ended tragically. He had survived countless injuries, blindness, deafness, a missing arm, yet evidence suggests he was finally crushed by a cave collapse, buried under the same rocks that once sheltered him. Even today, Shanidar Cave is known for dangerous rockfalls. But perhaps his story didn't end there. It wouldn't surprise researchers at all if Nandi himself had been intentionally buried, a final act of care from the same people who had tended to him in life. They had fed him, protected him, and kept him alive against all odds. Would they not have honored him in death too? His preservation across tens of thousands of years gives us a rare and moving glimpse into the harsh yet profoundly human world of the Neanderthals. The discoveries at Shanidar continue to shape the debate over whether Neanderthals showed compassion and symbolic thought. When we compare their burial practices to those of early modern humans, we see clear continuity, not a sharp divide. More and more, the evidence suggests that Neanderthals were not the primitive caricatures we once imagined, but a species rich in intelligence, adaptability, and emotion. They made and used fire, crafted complex tools through the Mysterian technique, likely wore hides or poncho-like garments, and ate what was most abundant, from large game to plants and mushrooms. They probably migrated seasonally between caves, returning to familiar shelters generation after generation. Some of these sites may have been occupied for more than 100 years. Others, containing just a few individuals, might represent small family groups or hunting parties resting between journeys. Every piece of evidence brings us closer to understanding them, not as strangers, but as kin. In Spain's Cueva de Ledron site, archaeologists uncovered remains of 7 adults, 3 adolescents, 2 juveniles, and an infant. Over in France, the La Roelle footprints told another story. Based on size, researchers identified a group of 10 to 13 individuals, where nearly all were juveniles or teenagers. Deep in the Chagirskaya cave in the Siberian Altai Mountains, the bones of 6 adults and 5 children were found, including what appeared to be a father, daughter, and possibly their cousins. Evidence suggests this small family may have perished together, perhaps from starvation. The mystery of how the Neanderthals disappeared remains one of the greatest puzzles in human evolution. For decades, scientists have debated theories, each offering a different answer for why our closest relatives vanished around 40,000 years ago. Some have pointed to climate change, others to competition with early Homo sapiens. Some blame disease or population collapse. The truth is likely a complex blend of all these factors. For many years, one of the most accepted explanations was that Neanderthals couldn't adapt to rapid climate change. According to this hypothesis, the last ice age brought sudden, severe cold and drought that Neanderthals simply couldn't endure. Ice core data from Greenland and other European archives confirm that drastic climate fluctuations occurred during this period. But in certain Mediterranean regions, where Neanderthals had lived for over 100,000 years, the evidence tells a different story. A research team from the University of Bologna analyzed stalagmites from caves in Apulia, Italy, and made a surprising discovery. The detailed reconstruction of paleoclimate patterns from 45,000 to 42,000 years ago, when Neanderthals and Homo sapiens coexisted, showed no dramatic temperature swings. This region, the Merge Karst Plateau, may have acted as a stable climate refuge during the transition from Neanderthals to modern humans. One stalagmite, nearly 20 inches long and formed between 6,000 and 27,000 years ago, preserved the longest continuous record of Ice Age conditions in the Western Mediterranean. Yet it showed no evidence of sudden environmental shifts capable of wiping out an entire species. So if climate wasn't the sole cause, at least not in these regions, what was? New research suggests that while climate change affected local populations, it likely played only a minor role globally. Instead, the extinction may have been driven by the interaction of food scarcity, interbreeding, and demography. Population studies show that Neanderthals lived in small, scattered bands, far smaller than modern human hunter-gatherer groups. Estimates suggest their total population may have fallen below 10,000 individuals spread across an enormous area, from England to Iraq to Siberia. That works out to roughly 1 Neanderthal for every 200 square miles, a dangerously low density for long-term survival. A large survey of paleoarchaeologists found that most now believe demographics, rather than environment or competition, played the biggest role in their disappearance. Small, isolated groups meant limited gene flow, making them especially vulnerable to random events like disease or resource collapse. Earlier ideas had assumed Neanderthals were less capable than us, but newer simulations tested the opposite. What if we were essentially the same? When scientists modeled both populations as functionally equal, they still found Neanderthals gradually vanished over time due to chance and population instability alone. Some researchers even suggest it wasn't conflict, but interbreeding that sealed their fate. Genetic studies show that about 2% of the DNA of people outside Africa today comes from Neanderthals, yet almost none of our genetic material was passed back to them. This one-sided gene flow may have reduced pure Neanderthal reproduction, gradually blending their small population into ours. Interestingly, mitochondrial DNA from modern humans shows no trace of Neanderthal ancestry. implying that only male Neanderthals and female Homo sapiens successfully mated, while male hybrids may have been less fertile. In such small groups, even minor reproductive inefficiencies could have been catastrophic. Their isolation also led to severe inbreeding. Genome studies reveal low genetic diversity across Neanderthal samples, suggesting their communities were small and genetically uniform. A recent find in southern France supports this, showing evidence of isolated family clusters that may have been cut off for generations. Similar genetic bottlenecks have been seen in remains from the Altai Mountains. Another intriguing idea points to biology itself. Neanderthals' larger skulls may have caused difficult childbirth. Using population models, researchers found that even a slight increase in maternal or infant mortality during birth could cause a gradual, irreversible population decline over thousands of years. Meanwhile, Homo sapiens may have had key advantages. They developed trade networks that stretched long distances, allowing them to exchange resources and ideas, a crucial edge during times of climate instability. Neanderthals lacked this safety net. Physically, Neanderthals were built for survival in cold climates, with wide noses to warm, frigid air and stocky bodies to retain heat. But Homo sapiens had innovation on their side. They made tailored clothing using bone needles, an advantage during harsh Ice Age winters. In the end, it wasn't one single catastrophe that ended the Neanderthals. It was a slow erosion of population, connection, and resilience. A story not of weakness, but of the fragile balance that determines whether a species endures or fades into memory. Early Homo sapiens had a technological edge. They created innovative tools like bows and arrows and enjoyed a more varied diet compared to the Neanderthals. While Neanderthals were highly skilled hunters, their expertise was focused mainly on large Ice Age animals. That specialization worked well, until it didn't. When the climate shifted and many of those big animals disappeared, their narrow focus may have left them more vulnerable to starvation. Their extinction appears to coincide with what's known as Heinrich Event 4, a time of extreme climate instability marked by intense seasonal swings. Later Heinrich events have also been linked to major cultural turnovers, times when entire populations in Europe collapsed and new groups emerged. This particular cold pulse may have emptied entire regions once occupied by Neanderthals. But unlike earlier cycles, these lands were soon resettled by migrating humans, ultimately pushing Neanderthals out for good. Another intriguing possibility comes from Earth's own magnetic field. Around 41,000 years ago, the Lachaume geomagnetic excursion caused the planet's magnetic shield to weaken temporarily. That shield normally protects Earth from harmful solar and cosmic radiation, including ultraviolet rays. Some scientists believe this increased radiation exposure could have damaged ecosystems and possibly affected Neanderthal survival. Then there was the Campanian ignimbrite eruption, a massive volcanic explosion near present-day Naples, Italy, roughly 39,000 years ago. It released more than 200 cubic kilometers of magma and ash, blanketing parts of Europe. Some researchers propose that this catastrophic event contributed to the Neanderthals' decline. The theory suggests that even though Neanderthals had endured multiple Ice Age cycles over 250,000 years, their inability to adapt their hunting strategies to rapid change may have sealed their fate. There's also the idea that violence played a role. Anthropologist Kwang Huno and others have discussed the possibility that direct conflict with Homo sapiens may have hastened Neanderthal extinction. In early hunter-gatherer societies, violence often erupted over scarce resources, especially after natural disasters. It's plausible that territorial clashes or even primitive warfare occurred between the two human species. The notion that early modern humans violently replaced Neanderthals was first put forward in 1912 by French paleontologist Marcelin Boule. While we've never found mass graves or battle sites confirming direct combat, the evidence of interbreeding between the species makes it clear they interacted, sometimes intimately. In fact, you could argue Neanderthals never fully went extinct. Every person today whose ancestors come from outside Africa carries traces of Neanderthal DNA in their genes. By that measure, Neanderthals live on, within us. Another hypothesis suggests that Homo sapiens may have carried infectious diseases that devastated Neanderthal populations. As Neanderthals encountered these new pathogens, they likely had little or no immunity, leading to deadly outbreaks. Meanwhile, humans from Africa had evolved stronger defenses, having already adapted to a wide range of tropical diseases. The scenario may have mirrored what happened when Europeans arrived in the Americas centuries later, bringing diseases that wiped out indigenous populations. When we put all these pieces together, it's clear there wasn't just one cause for the Neanderthals' disappearance. It was a convergence, a perfect storm of small populations, environmental stress, disease, genetic decline, and competition with a closely related species that ultimately proved more adaptable. Yet even in extinction, Neanderthals left a mark. Their DNA still shapes who we are. Genetic studies show that people of non-African descent carry between 1 to 4% Neanderthal genes. A team of researchers using advanced computational genetics has found that these genes continue to influence human biology today, particularly our immune systems. For evolutionary scientists, these findings fill in critical gaps about how interbreeding with archaic humans continues to shape our modern bodies. About 60,000 years ago, modern humans migrating out of Africa met and mated with Neanderthals who had already lived in Eurasia for hundreds of thousands of years. As these humans spread across the world, they carried a small but lasting piece of Neanderthal heritage within their genomes. This genetic exchange may have even given early humans a survival advantage. By inheriting genes from Neanderthals, they may have gained beneficial traits that helped them adapt to new and challenging environments. But that inheritance wasn't entirely positive. Some Neanderthal DNA has been linked to modern conditions such as diabetes, lupus, and Crohn's disease. So while Neanderthals vanished from the Earth around 40,000 years ago, their legacy continues, woven into our DNA, influencing our biology, and reminding us that the line between them and us is far blurrier than we once believed. The negative effects seen in modern humans might have been triggered by changes in our lifestyles over thousands of years. It seems that our Neanderthal inheritance has brought both advantages and disadvantages. Long ago, Neanderthals may have passed viruses to early humans, perhaps even ancient forms of certain pathogens, but those same extinct relatives also gave us genetic defenses. Pathogens and the diseases they cause have always been some of the most powerful selective forces in human evolution. And now, with all this new evidence, it's impossible to view Neanderthals as the brutish cavemen of outdated stereotypes. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe my channel. Wait for second part.